Good afternoon. Good, you can hear me. I'm delighted to be back at We Share Fest. Last year we had a policy jam, which was great fun, and it's exciting to actually see. Yeah, that was really good. Excited to see how much deeper and broader we've gone this year. So today I'm going to explore this concept of a shareable city, or a shared city, or sharing cities, and show what it means for urban planning, sustainable growth, and well-being. I'm going to build on some of the comments of Michele and Neil and actually wrap this all together, but I'm also going to focus on the role of what I call grass tops, complementary to grassroots, but grass tops refers to local, small g government, and how governments can really actually help this space scale. So engineers are hard at work trying to help us share in cities. This is often what we get, sharing the road. We need to do much better than this. We need to radically rethink how we share all kinds of assets throughout cities. And I also want to put this in the broader context of urbanization. In 2008, for the first time in human history, more than 50% of the global population live in cities. By 2030, that percentage will be 60%. By 2050, 70%. And by 2100, it is expected that 85% of a global population of 10 billion people will live in cities. That's more people than inhabit the entire Earth today. Now, that is quite astounding in and of itself, but moreover, urbanization and where urbanization is happening is highly uneven. The vast majority of urban growth is in developing markets, the developing world. And what I want for us to think about today is not only what does the concept of shareable cities mean for Paris and London and Berlin, all cities I love and care about, but also what does this mean for cities like Jakarta, Johannesburg, and Rio de Janeiro. Meanwhile, we have cities that are starting to figure this out and starting to experiment in interesting ways. This example, that used to be parking spaces. Now, thanks in part to participation by local government, it's a collaborative space where people can connect and just share and enjoy. You'll note that we're still living with and around cars, but we're not living for them. We're rethinking community connectedness, health, well-being, and again, meeting with our neighbors. So what I'd like to do, I apologize for the bleached colors, not my fault. Pause for a moment and think about this. What kind of city do you want to live in? If you work in local government, what kind of city do you want to lead? What kind of city do you want to help create and inspire elsewhere? I suspect it's going to be full of what I call all of the R's. It's going to be resilient. It's going to be economically robust. It's going to be rich, as one of my good friends says, rich in the currencies that matter. And it's going to be full of relationships. Meanwhile, and again, I hope you can read that, as we all know, all of these terms have shown up. And obviously, these 3 days, we're exploring a lot of these terms, so I'm not going to go into them in detail. What I want to point out is that in each of these examples, it's playing out. The sharing economy is playing out in cities. The trust economy is playing out in cities in different and beautiful ways. Lots of different ways. A few examples. Landshare in the UK connects people with green space for gardening to people who would like to garden. As we know, bike share is one of the most common type of city-sponsored sharing programs. More than 500 bike sharing programs exist in more than 50 countries around the world. Good Gym, one of my favorite examples, also from the UK, but this is matching people who want to get fit by doing good in their communities with elderly, homebound, and isolated people. They've partnered with the National Health Service, again, role of government. And then Somewhere To, which is a platform to connect all kinds of underutilized space with young people who want a space to create, to perform, to practice, or to launch companies. Each of these examples is a great case of how sharing is happening in cities with government participation, but it's ad hoc. It's happening on a one-off basis. And I would like for us to rethink what the sharing economy can mean for a city from the perspective of integrated urban planning. And in that way, we have to rethink how cities and the sharing economy can come together in a very comprehensive, knock it out of the ballpark way. And this has two different manifestations. One, how can the city itself and local government use the sharing economy for its own operations? Think of the city as an enterprise. How can it be run more efficiently and with more connectedness? Secondly, of course, how can cities, through their role as policymakers, local government, how can they create the enabling environment that allows business to thrive and to scale and to do things that no individual and no single platform can do? We know that the sharing economy produces economic, environmental, and social benefits. In the context of a city, I like to call this a civic trifecta. Given all of the challenges that city leaders face today, there are very few solutions that tick so many boxes at once. So, quick recap of what some cities in the world are doing to become more shareable. In the US, last summer, the mayors of 15 cities, including San Francisco and New York, but also places like Louisville, Kentucky, and Tucson, Arizona, signed the Shareable Cities Resolution, declaring their support for the sharing economy. Now, this doesn't mean that they're all of a sudden overnight shareable, but they have made a symbolic commitment to learn more about this space. Go down to Sydney, Australia, and the government co-sponsored the production of the Share Sydney Guide, which is quite simply a publicly available, downloadable booklet on what the sharing economy is and how people can get involved in the city. Then, of course, we've got Seoul, and I know a lot of people here know about Seoul Sharing City. This is by far the most comprehensive city approach, led by the mayor, who's truly a visionary. They are rethinking every aspect of their city planning policy with the sharing economy. So they've passed legislation, they've committed investment funds, they're incubating companies alongside residents. And last but not least, it's not just local governments that can lead this charge. Companies are starting to get involved and recognize the importance of cities to their overall strategy. Many of you probably know Airbnb recently announced their Shared City Initiative with their first city partner in Portland. And I've spoken to at least 3 companies in the last 24 hours here that have also told me about their city's strategy. Sometimes it includes policy reform, sometimes it doesn't. That, to me, is probably the most exciting thing I'm taking away from WeShareFest so far. So feel free to surprise me more. But let's look at, this is not just about governments and how can they lead the charge. That's what I spend my time focusing on. Companies play a key, exciting role here. But just because you want to be a shareable city doesn't mean it's easy to do so. In the US, we say, Houston, we have a problem, which refers to an aborted Apollo 13 spaceship mission. Why do we have a problem? The number one reason? Policy. And some of the other speakers spoke about this, but we are dealing with a massively outdated policy regime in most cities. We've built laws and regulations for an ownership era and an industrial economy, and we now need to update that. But I like to say this is not unique to the sharing economy. This is a natural part of innovation itself. I use the example of cars. When the car was first introduced, the rules in many places said you can drive a car on the road so long as it doesn't go faster than a horse and buggy, and so long as someone is standing in front of the car with a big flag to warn people that a car is coming down the road. That seems ridiculous to us today. But you can think about how at the time, this was so revolutionary, we weren't sure what to do about it. The sharing economy is kind of like in that position today. And again, the second piece, though, if we're going to get from where we are today to where we want to be, the role of grasstops, what I term local government, is absolutely essential. Not only to create rules that can help platforms scale to a degree that they never could before, replicate, franchise. It's not about one company necessarily becoming the biggest, but it's about helping the whole space grow. And also, if we want to talk about inclusive city building and inclusive frameworks, The government historically has been responsible for representing those voices that don't have a seat at the table. They've been responsible for representing low-income populations and so forth. That is going to be an equally important piece of the pie and something that the government is uniquely positioned to play. So for those of you who are new to the shareable cities concept and policy issues, this is just a quick recap. We could spend all day on any one of these. But the issues and themes that most commonly come up include taxation, insurance, zoning, the difference between a personal hobby and a professional business, and licensing and certification. Again, come find me afterwards if you want to talk about more of this in more detail. I work with policy makers around the world, and a lot of times they say to me, yes, we get this, but we just don't know enough to be able to take action. And moreover, we don't know what we don't know, so like, what do we do? And I like to remind them that you're never going to know everything that you want. There's a much bigger risk of saying we don't know, and so we're not going to do anything. That exposes all kinds of latent risks, and also your peers, other cities are starting to get this, and they will be moving ahead. You need to be bold and think about, going back to when I said, what kind of city do you want to live in? For policymakers, any of you in the room, what kind of city do you want to lead? And you can't just sit by idly and assume that this is going to take care of itself. So, we don't know what we don't know, but what do we know about the sharing economy in cities? We know that Airbnb is contributing hundreds of millions of dollars and pounds to the markets, the cities that they serve worldwide. We know that organizations like Peers are helping to identify and tackle some of these outdated policies and regulations. We know that organizations like BayShare are partnering with local government around things like resilience, emergency planning, and disaster relief. And they're also doing collaborations outside of partnering with the local government. And, as Neil mentioned, we've got things like the Sharing Cities Networks, which is a grassroots effort. Fabulous. We need the grass tops to complement that. Last but not least, the drivers behind the sharing economy and sustainability have an extraordinary overlap. So any city that cares about sustainable growth, climate change, etc., has to, not should, has to take a look at the sharing economy. There's no other single solution I've come up with that ticks so many boxes at once. So finally, what does this mean? So great, we've got outdated policy. What do we do? How do we move forward? Again, I could spend the entire time or even the entire day talking about this slide alone. But really quickly, the three things that a local government needs to do. One, identify what public interests are actually at stake. What are the risks? What are the benefits? What do we really, really care about here? Secondly, if a policy does need to be reformed, how? Do we want to create incentives to encourage certain behaviors, carrots, as we would say, or disincentives to discourage behavior, sticks? If you've got a law and it doesn't work, what do you do with it? Do you draft a new law? Do you create exemptions and carve-outs? There's not a one-size-fits-all rule here, but this is the process that I try to guide policymakers through. And finally, identify what's connected. This one rule actually could have a series of ripple effects, and again, from an urban planning perspective, is really about looking at that holistic picture. And at the end of the day, we find that a whole lot of stuff is connected. So, final quote. I love this quote by Mark Twain. It's not what you don't know that gets you into trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't so. And that is my challenge to policymakers, to all of us really. Challenge our assumptions around what's required for sustainable, resilient city growth, and let's create a more shareable, sustainable future together. Thank you.